Hello, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking about the different types of bits that you might experience in either home ownership, home maintenance, as a carpenter, or just as somebody who owns property and wants to look after something. You may also even work on computers or any number of different things and run into all sorts of different types of fasteners. The basic three that you will typically see is either called a Phillips head, which looks like a star or plus sign, or any number of different names that I've heard over the years, but the base name for it is called a Phillips. This is a Phillips 2. The typical 1 through 3 is 1, 2, and 3 of the Phillips. Likewise, under the Robertson line of bit heads, this is a Robertson 2. This one has a square head. This one was actually invented in Canada. And the idea behind it is that it's supposed to retain the screw head within the bit. So even if you're pointing downwards with the bit, it should ideally stay within the socket as it has friction. It was supposed to be a benefit in comparison to the Phillips heads, which obviously do slide out easier, but do allow for better angular screwing rather than straight on screwing like the Robertson is designed for. And the final one of the typical three that you'll run into is a slot head. And this one is basically just a straight line. It's one of the older types of screw heads that are available out in the world. It is one of many different types of ways of fastening. For more of a classic architecturally pleasing or matching of old finishes, you'll find a lot of slot head screws. You can sometimes get away with using slot heads to take out Phillips. Sometimes, even if in desperate situations, you can use them for taking out an old Robertson head, which is rotten. Most of the time, most people, when it comes down to screwing anything, will want to use a screwdriver. This one is a multi-bit. It allows for removal of the magnetic head and allows you to reuse it with anything else that might fit within the same socket size. You can even use this as an Allen wrench head if you needed to as well. The basics to it for this one, which I liked, is that it is magnetic, which then turns the bit head into a magnetic lock as well too, typically retaining most screws that do go onto the end of it. Now, would I want to use these same with an impact driver? Probably not, especially if I'm doing a lot of screws. I'm not going to get into the ways that different impact drivers work, but if you are to use an impact driver, I do highly recommend, if you're doing a lot of screws, especially if they're cheaper screws and they might blow up or break on you, use an impact driver head. The impact driver ones typically are hardened steel in comparison to a bit more of a cheaper or even chrome model screw heads that I've seen for drill bits, which are really cheap. They do often break a little bit easier, and for instance, this Robertson, which I've used probably on tens of thousands of screws, still actually works and retains fairly well, even though it is quite worn in comparison. But the amount of aggravation that I've given it over the years, it works quite well. Now back onto the different types of screw heads. Obviously you can find them in different lengths. These are 6-inch. The average one that you'll find is closer to about 3 inches. The 6 inches, the other main standard that you'll find. I even own a few that are about a foot long, but can't necessarily find them. You can find extensions, you can find all sorts of other things to utilize and access areas that are harder to screw into. That would obviously be somebody who's a little bit more professionally inclined and would use that type of stuff a lot more often, but it is good to know that it's out there. Other types of screws that you might find are Torx heads, are all sorts of specialty fitting heads from, like even Trex Decking has a specialty Torx head that they use. You'll find different types of mechanical fastening heads. So don't be afraid. If you find something that doesn't work, sometimes you can find it at your local hardware store. All the best.